Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Now, today I'm going to talk about how you can set your enemies on fire, then burn the ashes. This is my 3.8 Blight League ready guide to building a Fireball Trickster. Now, in 3.7, Trickster Fireball Ignite was a serviceable but an unspectacular build. I'm posting this guide because I believe it's going to be much better in patch 3.8. Now there's a few changes. You can see on the screen at the moment is the development manifesto for balance in Path of Exile Blight. And I want to talk about the two major changes that have made this build, in my opinion, considerably better. There's also one that's going to make it worse, and I'll get to that as well. But I think first up, let's go through the good stuff. So, the changes that it benefits from. In the global gem levels section, you'll see that there's a whole lot of discussion of new items that have been added to the game that allow you to get considerably higher levels for skill gems than you've been able to get in the past. Now both Fireball and VAAL Fireball scale very considerably with gem level. Both the actual hit damage of the Fireball itself scales, but so too does the scaling of the burn, the ignite that the Fireball leaves behind as well. Now, it's possible to roll at high level staves that will give you +5 to the level of all fire spell gems that you have equipped in any items that you're wearing. So you could have one of these staves and then have in your chest piece a bunch of other, you can have a chest that's got a whole lot of other mods that also benefit the Fireball that you've got in there. This allows you to get considerably higher skill levels than you've been able to get in the past. And if you don't want to go with staves, if you don't feel like you want to be locked into them, you have the option of getting +2 on each of your left hand wand, dagger, or scepter, and your right hand wand, dagger, or scepter. So you can get +4, which is not quite as good, but it's not much less, and it does give you a whole bunch of other stats that are available. Now, additionally, burning damage gained a new stat, and this is fire damage over time multiplier. So there are new item modifiers and crafting modifiers that apply to fire damage over time multiplier and ignite damage over time multiplier to give burning builds options closer to cold damage over time and chaos damage over time builds. So what this means is that there's a couple of new axes to scale your damage on, as well as the versions that already existed. So the axes that already allowed you to scale fire damage, you could get increased fire damage on the tree, you could scale up your gem to level 21, and a few other things. You've now got the ability to scale it on a new axis of adding more caster levels to your gem, and on a new axis of fire damage over time multiplier. So with all that in mind, I think there's a lot of potential for a Trickster build to be one of the best options for a Fireball. So why Trickster? Trickster is specialized quite considerably in dealing damage over time. So I'll just quickly jump into Path of Building and showcase the Trickster Ascendancy itself. And you'll see here that there's a couple of very juicy nodes. Patient Reaper, 50% increased damage over time. 70% increased recovery of life, mana, and energy shield if you've killed an enemy affected by your damage over time recently. This is a strong node. Prolonged Pain, 20% increased skill effect duration, 20% more damage over time. Very solid stuff for adding more and more and more and more and more damage to your fireballs. Now, for all that I've talked about the improvements that have happened to the potential for Fireball, I do think it's worth saying that the mana changes will hurt this build, and a mana flask will probably be mandatory. So what this means in practice is that you're going to have one less damage-oriented flask than you could have had in the past. I think that that's a pretty small trade-off, to be honest, for the power that's been gained by all of these changes. So, we've had a quick look at what the Trickster Ascendancy offers in terms of the damage side of the build. There's also Swift Killer, which is just an all-round very good value node, and there's Ghost Stance, which is solid defensively. Those are the 4 different Ascendancy points that I suggest you take, and I would actually make a rush to Prolonged Pain when you start your character. So normal Labyrinth, take Patient Reaper, Cruel Labyrinth, take Prolonged Pain. And then Merciless and Eternal, your choice. Take Swift Killer in one of them, Ghost Dance in the other. Take Swift Killer if you want to get access to Frenzy charges and Power charges earlier. And take Ghost Dance if you want to be a little bit more durable for when you go to the Eternal Labyrinth. Lastly, if you're playing in Hardcore, I would suggest that you go with Ghost Dance early, because this build is a little bit squishy. And to be honest, I think that you might want to give some thought to modifying it, sacrificing some of the damage nodes if you're playing in Hardcore, in order to pick up some more life nodes. Okay, so let's talk quickly about the passive tree. Essentially, the passive tree has a number of clusters on it that benefit fire damage over time. And what I'll do is I'll just quickly bring fire damage over time multiplier. You'll see some of the nodes that will show up in Path of Building that have the new stat on them. 4% fire damage over time multiplier, so I'll call this Fedotum. This one has 12% Fedotum, so it's possibly the best node that you'll pick up on the entire character. Breath Flames here has 10% Fedotum, nice. 4% Fedotum, 4% Fedotum, 3% Fedotum, 6% Fedotum, and then you'll get Arsonist very, very late in your character's career. I'm making it around about level 92 here, but you'll pick up Arsonist and it'll give you 6% Fedotum, and this minor node here will give you 3% Fedotum as well. So there's a good amount of multiplicative damage. Essentially, the way that I like to think of that is that each 10 points of Fedotum that you can pick up is pretty close to getting an additional gem level on your Fireball or Fireball/VAAL Fireball. Now, I have no real intention with this build of cheating the soul costs of VAAL Fireball. You will want to use a VAAL Fireball, so as soon as you can get your hands on a VAAL Fireball, you should start leveling it. But most of the time you're going to be throwing fireballs. You want to save your VAAL Fireballs for when there's a situation where it's going to be particularly useful, and then you'll just have to wait a considerable period of time until you can cast it again. In terms of skill gems, the way that we're going to be linking up our skill gems, firstly we're going to be using a VAAL Fireball. We're going to be linking it to Combustion, to Burning Damage, to Deadly Ailments, to Unbound Ailments, and to Greater Multiple Projectiles. The other option that we want to keep in mind is that when we're not, we also want to keep Ignite Proliferation as an option in mind as well. So essentially, VAAL Fireball is your primary skill. Combustion, Burning Damage, Deadly Ailments, Unbound Ailments are your permanently on supports, and then you can use Ignite Proliferation or Greater Multiple Projectiles depending upon the situation. I think most of the time you'll be using Greater Multiple Projectiles because you want the extra screen coverage that you get from that. In terms of other skill gems you want to use, you'll need a movement skill. I suggest that you use Flame Dash, but feel free to modify this in accordance with your own preferences. Flame Dash, I find it works well with faster casting, but other potential movement skills are things like Whirling Blades. Whirling Blades has its strengths, it can be used with Fortify. I'll let you make up your own mind there. I also suggest that you use a Guard skill. Guard skills are particularly good at ensuring that when you are surprised and like when you're surrounded by enemies and taking a lot of damage, that you can throw up a guard and just endure some of the damage that's coming in. In terms of guard skills, this build, Molten Shell is the strongest of the guard skills, but you can't really use it very well because most of the gems that you're using are not red. When your gems are mostly not red, you're not going to be able to be using items that have a lot of armor on them, and so Molten Shell is not going to perform very well. For that reason, I suggest you either go with Steel Skin or with Immortal Call. I suggest experimenting with both of them, and I suggest experimenting with both casting them manually and also with having them triggered by cast when damage taken. It tends to be an individual player preference as to which one works better, and I'll leave that decision up to you. There's not actually any other really critical skills that you can use, so what I would suggest is that you fill out any other slots in your gem setup with various fill them up with just utility skills that you prefer. There is some value to using the Malevolence aura to increase your damage over time, but that is going to be the only other real one that sticks out. Now, in terms of gearing, the key things that you need to look for. There are new sources of fire damage over time multiplier, which we don't know how they're all going to be obtained as yet. These are going to be something that you'll have to keep an eye on sources like the Path of Exile subreddit to find out what has been found and how it's crafted. There's also plus levels to fire skills gems, which we know will be added to the regular mod pool for staves and for daggers and for wands and for scepters. Chess piece, early on I suggest that you use a tabula rasa. Mid-game, I suggest that you look for a Skin of the Loyal that has 1 beneficial corruption on it and has good colours. Very late, I suggest that you either use a Great Shaper chest that has +1 to gem levels and or socketed gems are supported by Arcane Surge, which is a mod that comes from Delve's Etheric Fossils, or a Skin of the Loyal with 2 great corruptions on it. You'll want to be using opal rings eventually, but while you're getting yourself sorted out, feel free to use resist rings, feel free to use life rings as need be. For your belt, you're going to want to craft it with the Scorch Fossil mod, which adds fire damage, increases fire damage, and or the Prismatic Fossil mod, which increases elemental damage. Alternately, you can use a Corroded Fossil, which increases damage with ailments. Now this has higher numbers than the Scorch Fossil or the Prismatic Fossil have individually, but the corroded fossils preclude getting any elemental rolls at all. The god tier roll would be using a tangled fossil and getting all 3 at once. However, this is extraordinarily unlikely, and I don't think that it'll exist during the entire league. For jewels, Scorched Fossils will provide the best bang for your buck here. Scorched Fossils will allow you to roll jewels that will provide increased fire damage, increased burning damage, and all sorts of other good stats that you want. Otherwise, you can get by with the basics of life, move speed, and resist on rares everywhere, which is a good spot to be in. The easier your gearing is, the more flexibility you've got. Last thing I would suggest is using one of the Rolling Flames unique jewel, which is a threshold jewel that increases the size of the explosions your fireballs set off when they go off. In any case, that's all I've got for this build at the moment. It is still at the theory level. It hasn't been put into practice yet because a number of the mods don't yet exist in the game. However, there'll be more information coming out on them soon. If you got any questions, definitely fire away below. Otherwise, have a good one.